All right, let's jump in. So can you guys see the green slide?
Yes.
All right. So this is probably the first part of the series that I'm actually planning to start um, based on some things that we're noticing in the market. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of fluff and real stuff around AI. There's some there's a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of myths. Budgets are getting increased. We actually have a couple clients who got budgets for AI and they just don't know what to do with it. So uh, this is the series that's going to be dedicated to AI investments in AI, best practices with AI based on learnings that we had at Zont based on my personal experience. So in the first, this is the part one of the series, and I'll publish the series outside of the Sitecore user group moving forward. Like, this is what I wanted to kick off with, and talk about the areas, picking the areas to start with AI, selecting the right place to start. When you start thinking about AI, especially Gen AI, there are so many applications come to mind, so many ways that it could help, real, unreal, tangible, intangible. It's there. There's there's a methodology that we can use to get started on the right track from the beginning and help grow from there on. Because there's some tracks that where AI is applicable. There's some tracks where AI is not applicable at all. That's not the right tool for the job, period. And then there are areas where AI is applicable, but there's a ceiling to the ROI. What we want to make sure we do is we pick an area to focus on that doesn't have that ceiling. That we're going to continue growing. The more we use AI, the more we apply it in that area, the more it's going to help us. The more it helps us, the more we apply it, and we sort of create that flywheel of perpetual growth. So we'll start off with the areas where we can, where we should and shouldn't apply AI. So there's one there's one obvious one, is whether we need a deterministic solution to a problem. There are lots of problems out there, and AI is almost like a hammer, and everyone's trying to use it as a nail for all sorts of problems. But there are deterministic problems that require deterministic solution and problems that do not. Whether any sort of AI is an estimation, it's not 100% certainty. There are various forms of AI, and all of them provide a certain percentage of accuracy. So some are pretty accurate, some are not. So it depends on various factors. But even if the answer is 99.999% accurate, when we need a deterministic solution, it's still the wrong answer. If we calculate a picture frame to be 100 inches for a 101-inch picture, the picture's simply not going to fit. So it doesn't really matter. So the simple one is, if it's a deterministic, go with statistics. And there is a lot to learn about statistics. There's, especially, I think in the Sitecore space specifically, we talk about that there's a lot of room for statistics application before we even get to AI. And then if we don't need a deterministic solution, if an approximation is fine, especially with a large margin of error, if we don't need a 100% solution, if it's not a 1 and 0 type or black and white type decision, then we can go with AI. So that's the first filter we should put all of our thoughts through. Now, the second filter is the ROI, the expected ROI filter. So there's a lot to be said about organizing, about other things that we can do before we even get to using AI for solving problems. So for instance, when we're talking about analytics, we're talking about data, gathering insights, gathering additional information from analytics, from reports. There's a lot that can be done with higher ROI before we even start looking at AI. So the first thing that we can do is simply organize the data. A lot of times when you structure the data and organize the data, you can simply report on that organized data and draw insights from there. Once we got the data organized, the next step would be using statistics to drive additional insights out of the data. Now, once we've exhausted the statistics, that's when we should be moving into the AI space. That's when artificial intelligence starts helping us. Now, See, the problem is that everyone thinks that it's sort of a linear progression or somewhat close to linear progression. There's no linear, no such thing as a perfect direct progression, but somewhere along those lines, on average, is sort of you sort of move through these stages equally if you're aware of those stages. But the reality is this. So we can get a decent amount of insights from organizing data. The highest ROI comes from using statistics, and then AI comes into play at the end. So before you jump into using AI and using it as a hammer for every problem as a nail, think about first organizing the data. Think about using statistics. There's a lot in there that we can dig into in terms of driving insights, driving information that brings a lot of value to the business before tapping into AI. AI does require a significant amount of investment to do it right. And here's what we should be looking at. So once we've got through all those stages, once we sort of narrowed down the non-deterministic, the problems that don't require deterministic solutions, once we eliminated all the other ways to drive ROI out of data, like data organization statistics, and we're looking at some options for applying AI, here's the final filter that we want to put things through. Find a problem where, with an increased use of AI, the value increases. Like the more we use AI, the more data we bring into our AI, the more we use whatever that model that we're going to build, the higher the value becomes. It seems like it should be the case everywhere. However, there are certain cases where that's not the case. So with marketing and sales and like inventory management, there are 3 examples here. The more we use AI, the better it gets. With marketing, if we apply that to personalization, or with sales to predictions, or driving insights, the more we use artificial intelligence, the more data we generate as a result, the more data we feed into it, the better it gets at predicting, the more accurate it gets at predicting. So the value grows exponentially, right? In marketing predictions and personalization and experimentation and driving insights out of CRM data, for instance. However, on the other side, there's a ceiling that we can hit with customer service or scheduling. In fact, there is a massive risk in applying AI for simple customer service or scheduling applications, in the sense of the bottom line, the significant bottom line that comes with that. So, for instance, the value when AI does the job well with customer service. Let's say we're scheduling. There are multiple scheduling tools out there that you can sign up for. When it schedules a meeting correctly, it just does its job. There's no increase in value. It flattens out, right? The value curve flattens out. You can't do any better than just simply scheduling an appointment, right? But if you miss, now that could cause a big problem, right? So these are the cases where the investments in AI will likely not pay off, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. So when we're looking at marketing, sales, inventory, the value of AI application goes up with time. The more we use the application, let's say AI with scheduling, right, the higher chance it's gonna mess up at some point, right? The odds can be very low, but when it messes up, the negative impact is significant. And similar case with customer service. Let's say there's AI right now is good, but it still cannot create human connections, right? In a lot of cases. So the negative impact of that shortcoming could be significant. Where if it simply did the job, answered the question, it just did what it was expected to do, right? So we want to look for use cases where there's no ceiling in AI application, and there's very a small potential or small impact when AI does make a mistake. So obviously, needless to say, right? So the left side, that's the curve that we want to look for. So with all that, once we've narrowed down or shortlisted the use cases where we want to apply artificial intelligence, here's what we ultimately want to achieve. We want to achieve what's called a data learning effect. It's the flywheel. It's the flywheel of feeding information into our model, improving the model as the result of additional information, making the model put out better results, increase automation, which either cuts our cost, increase the profit, moves the needle on some sort of KPI, right? And that allows us to bring the outcome of that data back into the analytics, feed the model again, the model gets better, as it gets better, it becomes, predictions get more accurate. With more accurate predictions, automation increases, that generates further cost reductions, growth in profit, or moving the KPIs, and that again, those investments or data feeds back into the analytics, right? So it's a perpetual flywheel that keeps spinning faster and growing as the more it perpetuates, right? So there's some best practices here, though. So the area that we want to select, where we want to apply AI, should allow us to, one, create this continuous effect, but also a continuous inflow of data. Ideally, not just the output data from the model, but also data from other sources. So the more data we can feed into our model, the more accurate it's going to become, the more relevant data, of course, right? The more accurate it's going to become, the better it's going to perform, the more automation we're able to achieve, right? And so on and so forth. And we want to pick the area where more data equals cheaper data, right? So the more data that we bring, the cheaper further data acquisitions become, right? So this is another filter that we want to apply to the area of AI application. So for instance, user-generated data. Applying AI or teaching AI on areas where we have network effects, right? The network effect is where the larger the network, the higher the value, right, of the network. So same thing. So for instance, user-generated content. Training a model on that brings more users in, and the more users come, the more data we can generate, right? And it just, again, becomes that perpetuating wheel, and the cheaper data acquisition becomes. Pick an area where we can relatively accurately generate synthetic data. That's really easy to do with Gen AI these days, right? So but not all areas are subject to accurate synthetic data generation by the tools we have access to. So be careful there. And then also pick an area where we can generate, where the data that we can acquire is up to date to avoid the model drift. So we want the most accurate data in mass quantities as much as possible to continue improving on that flywheel, right? So that's the data, right? So with the next one, so once we pick the area with the data, the next thing we want to look at is in the set of problems that we want to solve, right? We want to pick a problem that's small in size. One of the biggest probably mistakes that I've seen, actually, I saw that with one of our clients also, is trying to tackle too much with Gen AI, because Gen AI can just do all sorts of things, and let's just kind of throw that spaghetti everywhere and hope it sticks sort of approach. No, there are massive problems with that. If there's a large bottom line to that, right? So when large organizations and organizations especially that are immature in their marketing capabilities, there's a lot of resistance to AI. Sounds like a new shiny thing, but because of the fact that it's not deterministic, that scares people. The fact that it can generate certain things that are not controlled, that scares the leadership, right? What if it generates something that goes against the business model, right? It combines the two things that can be combined. For instance, one of our clients was concerned about the chatbot answering about two service lines together when they shouldn't be combined ever, right? So there's certain internal business rules, and that's, all these things can be fed into the model. They can be trained, but those are the thoughts that the leadership gets, right? So when looking for a problem to solve, find something small. Find something small and easy to solve, and solve it exceptionally well. Because one of the first things that will need to happen within an organization that's skeptical towards AI is to gain trust, to build that trust towards artificial intelligence. So picking a small problem will have a much higher ROI than sort of throwing Gen AI everywhere, because there's a much higher chance of Gen AI producing a negative, making a mistake, right? And giving a negative impact, right, to the business, producing a negative impact. So that's an important thing. So then, in terms of process, when we start rolling things out, so once we narrow things down, right, once we pick the problem that can fit the flywheel, we're able to generate data, we're able to feed the data, accurate data, up-to-date data, right? It's a small problem that we can easily fix. Pick the problem that augments rather than replaces a manual task, right? So that's the first problem that you want to solve. Gain trust from stakeholders, from the potentially the people that you're trying to help with AI. Gain their trust by automating or helping them solve a small problem in their day-to-day tasks, right? So once you solve that, then gradually move into replacing individual tasks with artificial intelligence, right? So move slowly, and then once you're able to replace individual tasks, then use agentic AI to replace entire processes. Right? So that's an important point. So don't jump into trying to tackle big problems. Don't try to replace the entire automate the entire process, especially if the company is skeptical towards AI. Start small and then move on. Okay. So, and as you move on, as you start creating a single flywheel, you start small in solving simple single tasks, you'll soon find yourself with multiple flywheels, right? So you have multiple flywheels, DLEs spinning in different areas, right? So they're spinning on their own. Ideally, they're self-sustainable. They're generating data, right? That feeds right back in, and they're just getting better and improving. Now, the next step that what we want to do is connect these flywheels and create a compound impact. We want to create what's called data learning effect networks. So each flywheel gets better on its own, right? And it grows exponentially. Now, when we start connecting them, we multiply that exponential growth even further, right? So if we can share the analytics, we can feed them, let's say, as an example, across the different models. And if the data that's gathered by one model can help another model, and then another, and that cycles through, then each model gets better exponentially. So now we've moved down from like 10x, 100x to 1000x, a millionx growth, right? So the growth becomes exponential. And that's why we want to initially pick an area that does not have a ceiling for growth. Because once the growth starts, it's going to accelerate exponentially. Okay? And then finally, what we want to do is ultimately automate entire processes. And this is where the value of AI is really going to be noticed. Where we using agentic AI to automate complex processes, decision making, combining LLMs with ALMs, combining agents, combining calls to APIs with decision making on the fly, and really automating the entire process, right? And that's really ultimately the final step. So this is something that we want to keep in mind. We want to pick an area that we can automate fully, right? So envisioning the steps of picking an area of investment that we know we can automate. We know it's not going to be immediate. We know the journey might be long, but we know it can be achieved. In other words, let's say there's no regulatory blocker that prevents us from doing it, right? There's no, for instance, internal company compliance requirements that are going to prevent us from doing it, right? So if there are no hard blockers, that's the area we want to focus on. So with that, I'll wrap up the area selection. So again, focus on the areas with no ceiling. Figure out if it's a deterministic problem that we're solving or not. Make sure that you've tried other things, like simple thing like organizing your data first, then use the statistical models to provide additional insights before moving into artificial intelligence. Remember, no matter what type of AI you're using, it's still inference, right? So it still has a percentage of accuracy that it provides. It's still decision making. It's still decisioning, whether it's a small decision or a large decision that it makes, right? Gen AI still takes decisions for the following character or sequence of characters to type out when you ask it a question, right? So these are just small micro decisions, and if they have the potential to grow into helping us solve larger problems with making larger decisions that can be also chained together and help us automate the entire process, that's the area I want to start with. So looks like we actually got a few people joining us. All right. Azar, Amir, Sixivan, how's it going, guys? Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, I ping at least one guy over here. I know Amir finally found us, and I don't know, Sukhjivan, I don't think we've met, but it'd be good to know where you're from. Azar is from Altitudo. Everybody knows Amir.
Yeah, hey Varun, I am from Oregon.
Oregon. All right. And who you work for?
Yeah, I'm in a Corvo company. It's a semiconductor company. Their main business is that, and their website is on Sitecore 9.3 platform.
Oh,
Expert.
very nice. So you're actually with a customer.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, very nice. Those are very rare to find people from customer side who attend Sitecore user groups. So it's so great to have you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Cool.
Welcome.
Yeah,
This your first time joining the LA one?
yeah. This one is my first time actually.
Awesome. Well, welcome.
I worked on earlier in the implementation partner teams. I worked in Cognizant, Infosys as well. During that, I was like as implementation partner, and this time I joined the company.
Awesome.
Very nice.
Awesome. Well, good to have you. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Oh, we got Sean on as well. So yeah, I think we're getting somewhere now.
Gotta give it a momentum.
With three now, we got a quorum. So
People are starting to trickle in. I was like, all right, okay, all right. Awesome. Well, with that, let's see. Sean, welcome.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for jumping on. So for those for folks, since we have a quorum here, by the way, so during the last user group of the year, what we usually do as a tradition, we give away some Sitecore swag. So if you guys are interested in getting some surprises in the mail, drop your mailing address directly to me in the chat, and we'll send you some Sitecore swag in the mail as the end of year present.
I'm not going to make you pay the postage to Australia, mate.
Yeah. I think there's nothing that I can send you that you don't already have. I don't think there's.
That's probably true.
Sitecore swag wise, probably.
You can see it on the top shelf behind me, probably.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't think that's possible. Alrighty. Well, with that, why don't we move on to the next session, Varun? I'll hand it over to you.
All right. How are we doing on time? How much time do I have?
You have about 40 minutes.
Oh, very nice. I don't think I'll need all 40, so we'll see how much we can cover here. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And again, thanks everyone for joining, because I think this is what keeps the spirit alive of these Sitecore user groups, is just people showing up, right? And hopefully we learn some, we share some. Actually, this was your presentation, I think was just very deep for me to kind of just take 2 steps back to say, well, why do anything? And how do you evaluate AI when, everybody in your company, in your organization is telling you, hey, do something with AI, right? And hey, we bought some AI, put it to use. Well, if you have AI in your hands, right, a hammer and a nail, like you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You want to hit everything on the head with AI. That's not how it's going to work. So I think some of what you showed today can be super helpful in helping project what you want to get out of AI before you dive into it from a cost perspective, from a benefit perspective. That value, I think, is interesting, right? If it's diminishing returns versus, anyways. So I really like that presentation. So I'll kind of, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. All right. So I'll kind of dive into it. Hello, everyone. I'm Varun Nehra, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Sitecore and Netlify and why they are better together. For those who don't know me, I am currently the head of value engineering at Netlify. Prior to this, I used to be the chief digital officer of Altudo, a Sitecore Platinum partner. Been doing this for 20 years, or actually been doing this for a few months, been doing that for 20 years. So it's been a little bit of shift in my career, moving towards products, and that too a very different product outside of content and commerce and things that I've done in the past. I don't know, I've worked with hundreds of clients over my career now, and 5 times Sitecore MVP. I'm based out of Atlanta, and I think I've done a few of these LA slugs, so I'm always excited when I get a chance to present here. And I think we're missing a few more people, but we have Rob and Sean and Amir and Vasiliy, all just amazing MVPs, ex MVPs, fellow MVPs, Sitecore rock stars, and of course Azar is on, and Sukhjivan, is great to have you as well. But the way I look at it is, I've always been in the business of empowering digital transformation with composable solutions. And that has kind of brought me to Netlify. The whole idea that web modernization will take the shape of enabling composability. And if you're not doing that, perhaps, there's a better way to do it. But I'll kind of dive into it with an intro about Netlify. It is surprising, but at times we do meet people like, what does Netlify really do? So I'm going to tell a quick story there, and then we'll dive into today's topic. But our founders coined the term Jamstack. That kind of kick-started the whole trend towards JavaScript APIs and markup just powering the future of the web. That was about 10 years ago, and we saw Mock come after that. We saw composable and Mock. These are all kind of different variants of how you kind of imagine web being composed of 3 basic components. So in 2014, they started in San Francisco. Today, more than 1 billion unique visitors hit Netlify. That's a lot of internet. Netlify serves more than 50 million plus sites and apps that are powered 24/7 on Netlify. And so one of these days I need to update that number. It's more than 6 million now, but more than 6 million developers in the community that have tried, tested, verified, deployed on Netlify. And we do see ourselves across multiple verticals, technology being the biggest vertical for us. So as you can imagine, us being in San Francisco, a lot of startups, a lot of hobbyists even, or students, or businesses, all sorts of backgrounds, people come to us, but especially in technology. But we're known in a lot of these verticals. But I'll call out a few customers here that are like actually Sitecore customers that have chosen to deploy with Netlify. And some of them may have had a relationship with Netlify even before they bought Sitecore. But the likes of L'Oreal, Nestle, and there are many more, but I'm just calling out a few that we have as joint customers, Volvo and others. But the way we look at modernization, and this is where we'll start to kind of narrow down, right? This is at the core of what we do at Netlify, but how does that translate to what you do with Sitecore? So the way we like to think about it is we're in the business of getting you from inspiration to production without the chores. So if you take the 3-step process from creation, then automation to operation, as in you develop an application, you create content, you create your design for customer experience or user experience, but you want to have some way to automate moving that inspiration to production, which is where you're operating that app. So one way to look at it is, we take this legacy workflow, and the first part there is, yeah, great, we're doing this the source control where we do, coding and collaboration, but all of this other stuff that needs to happen before you can get to production, whether you're managing, non-prod environments, dev and staging versus just managing your CI/CD pipelines and attempting to do blue-green. I don't know if people have truly been successful with blue-green within the Sitecore realm, between code artifacts and code and configuration and content and indexes. Tell me if you've really been able to achieve that without blowing the budget and having always on environments, right? So we think there's a lot of work. There's a lot of unnecessary work that goes into building and managing a lot of that, which we tend to eliminate by giving you really, flexibility to just kind of focus on the code. We take care of the rest and we keep the lights on. And I'll kind of sum this up into very specific features that Netlify has to offer. But when it comes to operating, what we're also doing is really helping you leverage modern compute. So going from legacy, which is, client server, databases, all the things that we know, have known for decades now, even in running Sitecore, on IaaS or PaaS or containers, underneath the covers, you're still using legacy compute. What we're hoping to get to is, or what we can guarantee with Netlify, but what we're hoping you will choose is, if you do decide to modernize and you are thinking about SaaS, you are thinking about headless, you are thinking about composable, you're looking to leverage the edge network with, CDN and edge functions and compute that give you that perfect lighthouse scores and that perfect, core web vitals and that performance. That just isn't possible if you're trying to orchestrate that by yourself on Azure or AWS. It's just almost impossible to achieve that unless you are in the business of technology and you have a full-on SRE team that is going to build and deploy that. Otherwise, why get into that business, right? If you're a CPG, manufacturing, or healthcare, or any other vertical besides technology, and even at times technology, right? They do choose to outsource some of that. But if you go into event-driven architectures, leveraging webhooks in your architecture, depending on GraphQL for querying, avoiding overfetching and underfetching of APIs to build, build with data models that are specifically built for supporting UI. That's what we get you to just by choosing us. There's nothing you need to do. We give you this by you connecting your source code to Netlify. So when it comes to Sitecore, Netlify and Sitecore, I'll kind of paint this picture and say, we're taking you from left-hand side to right-hand side. So left-hand side is what we kind of know the monolith to be in the XP world. You have content management, content delivery, everything in red is what we're saying, you shouldn't have to worry about. Everything in green is where you should invest, right? The business wants to invest in building your managed application on Sitecore that powers your .com or your storefront even, or a portal or anything else. But you shouldn't have to worry about everything else. So we move you to something very simple on the right-hand side by owning everything in blue, giving you all of that modern compute, and you are freed up to just write the application code, right? And this is where, if you're not leveraging this, then you're probably paying 2 to 3x more than you should in operating just modern web, right? And anywhere that hits a lot of traffic, or you have, customer-facing apps, then I would highly recommend you to look at the ROI of running it the old way versus the new. Paying for what you use versus, parking a lot of compute that you will never use on the left-hand side, right? You buy, a lot of compute, whether it's containers, whether it's VMs, or, whether it's PaaS, and the amount of time the services run. I mean, you can get down to some cost efficiencies, but when you get down to something like Netlify, you basically pay for what you use, whether it's bandwidth, whether it's web requests, whether it's actual serverless compute. So when it comes to transitioning to headless with Sitecore, you have 3 options. And some of my content here, by the way, I want to give credit to Jason Sincere and Fish Tank. We did this webinar together, so I've kind of borrowed a little bit of that content here. We worked on it together, and for us to say, like, option number 1, sure, you're on XP, you could stay on XP and do nothing and just do upgrades. Option 2 is you could go headless on XP, or option number 3, you could go to XM Cloud altogether. In both 2 and 3, you will see your infrastructure, your managed code working with Netlify in option number 2, they're not fully connected, they're disconnected, but Netlify is a target deployment provider. But in option 3, Sitecore and Netlify really come together really well. So when we're thinking about XM Cloud, what we're looking at is today your XP deployment goes through this flow, right? Where you have a .NET application, you have a number of developers and local environments that you have to configure and orchestrate, whether you're running containers or anything else. But your CI/CD has to go through content deploy, your custom build, your verification, and you're attempting that blue-green, and then you have multiple CDs and CMs, and you're doing IaaS or PaaS or whatever. But we think all of this is, again, less than ideal. And for us, moving to modern Sitecore, moving with Netlify, we make it easy to say you go from just some application code to Netlify owning CI/CD, and you have XM Cloud deployed to manage Sitecore SaaS, and then Netlify Core takes on the aspect of your public-facing site, and then Sitecore can offer you the editing environment. So we're taking all that cluttered way of building and deploying to something very simple where Sitecore and Netlify just work hand in hand. Now, alternatively, if you are working with XP, something similar here, but slightly different, to say, well, outside of what you will do to manage your CM and CD, you can basically eliminate all your CDs. And the part that you need to deploy to production for content delivery, you're able to just write Next.js code for that, pass it through Netlify, and basically run both your editing host and rendering host on Netlify. So you can eliminate anything else that you would do with Sitecore in typical Azure environment. But there's really a path to doing this successfully and recovering still quite a bit of cost, especially if you have a very scaled environment and a lot of traffic and you have a lot of content delivery that you need to orchestrate. Let me pause here and see if anybody has any questions about what I've shown so far. Does this resonate? I would even love to hear from Sukhjeevan, because he's on the customer side more than the rest of us, because I think the rest of us get it, but I'm happy to kind of take any questions at this point.
That Sitecore XP page, is that web pages, or is it pages, or is this a secret way to hint that
you were just saying whatever you want to call authoring, whether you're using Sitecore pages or you're using Experience Editor. The point is editing host, whatever version of that, right? You can run it on Netlify as well, and you don't need to orchestrate that on Azure.
Something that came up today that just reminded me of this. I heard about it from someone else a few months ago, well, several months ago. But I didn't give it much thought, and I didn't think it was widespread. But it seems like I've seen it again. I've seen it a couple more times. I saw it today again. The vendors that work with Sitecore, sometimes, as bad as it may sound, may intentionally pick to create a custom pipeline just to lock a customer into their services. And I mean, as much as we can want to think that, if vendors are trying to do the best for their clients, this is the third time that I heard it, so that's why I'm bringing it up. I was like, this is starting to come up more than what I would expect or want to hear about things like that. So when you're talking about the hosting CI/CD Netlify and automating the whole thing, there are tools for that. There are tools, and there are really good tools for that. And XM Cloud comes with automation. Netlify comes with automation. So if you're a customer listening to this recording post fact, please make sure you do your due diligence and ask your vendor next time they propose a custom pipeline. There better be a good reason for that.
Interesting. So you're saying there's agencies when you say vendors that are locking you into a custom build and release management process that locks them in as the vendor versus just, hey, let's just turn that whole thing off and you're free to choose wherever you want to deploy it or however you want to. Okay. That is very interesting. It's the first time I'm hearing of it, but I can imagine where that may be the case. But yeah,
Unfortunately, yep.
anybody else have any other questions or thoughts on what
So,
I've shown so far, or even
so Varun, usually we see that every application comes with some kind of a upgrade. So if Netlify is also will be similarly, so if there is any kind of a upgrade Netlify is doing, then do we see any kind of a impact on the CD side?
No. So okay. Let me put it this way. We are continually optimizing our infrastructure. We update our runtimes. We, turn on new data centers. We turn off old data centers. We sometimes migrate. I mean, we rebuild certain parts of our platform fully ground up even, but we have never had a client impacted in any of those migrations. So for us, it's infrastructure behind the scenes that we will update, but our commitment to our customers is zero downtime or impact to the customer. So you shouldn't see any impact. It's like Sitecore doing a product update. You shouldn't have disruption of service when they provide an update or a patch. So similar to that with
So
Netlify
it
too,
will
or similar
be
to Azure or anybody else, right? You
exactly.
shouldn't see an impact whether there's an upgrade to our infrastructure behind the scenes.
So is there any kind of a notification also will be sent out to clients or not specific?
Yeah, if there are times or if there are customers that may be impacted because of any service outage or anything else, you would definitely be notified. But I have not seen that. I can find out more about it, but that is the whole point that we're trying to avoid, is
Got
that you never get that notification because we want to make sure your environments are always up and running.
got it.
That is a part of us giving, 99.99 SLA, right? Uptime. So
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I see that going through multiple other meetings and conversation, I see Netlify is the best choice with Sitecore as well.
well, that's great to hear. That's reassuring to hear because a lot of the times I go and ask, and people are kind of coming around. Now, one of the things I have seen, to your point, Sujeevan, is that from a lot of SIs, we're starting to see that they're preferring Netlify because of our flexibility, our ease of use, both product, our support, and our people, and of course pricing. So it has been a little bit eye-opening in the last 2 months, just talking to a lot of people across the ecosystem. They are, in fact, feeling, that Netlify is the better option. But I would love to hear from our competition too, right? At times. So thank you for that. Anything else? If not,
Thanks.
I'll kind of wrap up here.
I'm good. Thanks.
Cool.
Hey,
But
Varun,
yeah,
I had a question.
go ahead.
So all your slides showed JavaScript for the head, so obviously running on Node.js. Does Netlify support other runtimes?
You mean outside of just front-end frameworks, JavaScript frameworks?
Yeah. So
You're,
kind of leading into my session next, talking about
I
.NET
was
Core.
gonna say,
Do you support other, I mean, there's heaps of others, you could be writing in Python or Go or anything, or is it just
yes.
Node?
No, it is more than Node. Actually, we run on Dino, so we support Python. We build our own stuff in Go. So yeah, I think, we support more than just JavaScript frameworks. But
Yeah, nice.
I think you should. Let me dig up some documentation for you, Rob. Of course, you can look it up, or you can, better yet, just ask chat, right? He'll tell you. But where you're going, I think it's an important question. So, it has been in the discussions. Can we support, a .NET runtime, right? So there's I can't say concretely that we're working on it or anything, but it has come up more than once. Let me put it that way.
That's good. I know some of the competitors you mentioned don't, so it
No.
could be a good differentiation. Yeah,
Definitely. Yeah. So one of the things we are from the get-go is framework agnostic. So we stick to that principle. So you will see, like, you know, even outside of Next, right, we have a bunch of other frameworks that we support. Astro is a preferred partner now, and they have chosen to deploy only on Netlify for that reason, for example. And we know Astro is gaining a lot of popularity there. But yeah. Angular, of course, Sitecore made a big announcement, right? Angular runtime is on Netlify, and the new XM Cloud Starter Kit that Liz announced at Symposium runs on Netlify. So yeah, we're definitely beyond Next.js, that's for sure.
yeah, good to hear.
Cool. All right, so I'll wrap up with this slide. And then I actually had a small demo plan. So if that's okay, Vasiliy, I'm going to take some time to do a demo. If not, we can switch to Rob and come back. But kind of summing it up, right? We're going from legacy to modern compute. This one slide should tell you everything you need to plan ahead to think about modern compute, right? Because you're going from CPUs and cores and storage and the traditional things that you get with Azure AWS calculators for traditional compute to understanding three buckets: infrastructure, then usage of that infrastructure, as in how much traffic you're going to put on that infrastructure, and what we call workflows. So one of the things you're looking for is, you want standard edge, you want performance edge, high performance edge. Do you need private connectivity, right? That allows you to connect back into your company's systems and infrastructure and kind of builds and have static IPs to do that. I put storage in there. It's pretty standard. You could say image CDN or anything else that's part of core infrastructure. But usage is interesting because now you're thinking about bandwidth. Well, how do I take I can tell you how many pages I have to load, but how can I tell you how much bandwidth I'll need, right? So if you come to us, we have a chart. We'll look it up and tell you based on average number of visitors or page views and page size. Will tell you how much bandwidth you need, how many web requests you're going to pass through Netlify, and then this ties back to our web application firewall that is available to you by default if you go with high performance edge. And then, interestingly, serverless functions. How much serverless compute do I need? Well, I have a formula for you. So if you tell me this is what our business does and this is how we run our pages, and whether you're commerce, then it's completely different, and you may have some higher usage of serverless functions. If not, you may not need as much, and you get a ton of compute baked into a package where you don't even have to worry about it. It's not even really charged as much as when you exceed a particular threshold. So you get a lot of compute bundled into your base package. And then the last one is about people. So thinking about how many engineers need to log into Netlify, how many builds you're going to run concurrently. That means how many teams need to operate on Netlify. So buying concurrent builds. So now what we also charge you for is, instead of it licenses and then putting together all the server infrastructure for CI/CD as well, now it is just compute. So if you have long running builds, we can make it faster with high performance build. If you need to run multiple builds simultaneously, we can offer concurrency and things like that. But what you don't pay for and you get out of the box is instant rollbacks, deployment previews. You get a URL for every deployment that you do. Every developer gets their own staging environment, instantaneous disaster recovery and backups. And of course, I mentioned WAF, and then you have HIPAA and PCI and SOC and all sorts of compliance that's baked into it. So you get a lot of that goodness, just part of Netlify. So this is one way to kind of just easily summarize how you should think about Netlify when you're planning to enable that in your hybrid cloud. Any questions about this? Hopefully this is not too overwhelming, because I know our competition has 20 line items to size up something like this for you. But for us, we asked simply three things. Give us your page visits, give us your number of users, and do you want platinum support or standard 24/7? And we can create a nice package for you that gets you going. So we made it that easy for our customers. All right, so then it was about a demo. So let me see, how am I doing on time? I don't want to take up, Rob, if you need to go next. I just want to make sure I'm good on time.
Looks like we got some time. Let's roll it.
All right, so I'll do a very quick demo. Hopefully this will be done in like 5 minutes. So if you haven't seen Netlify, this is what it looks like. Our app, and of course, this is a release. I think I was pleasantly surprised when I logged in today because this wasn't available yesterday, but we updated our whole menu. So one of the things you'll see in here is multi-tenant management with teams. So you have the ability to create orgs and teams. So this is an org, and under that, I have a bunch of teams, and I can kind of switch and toggle and say which teams I want to manage, and each team then has a bunch of sites. So if you are a complex organization, we can break it down and tell you how much usage, bandwidth, so you can see the usage up here, and then you get more details about it. But for the demo, I'm going to stick to the demo, which is Sitecore. There's so much to show here about Netlify, but the important thing to know are these first 4 things. This is what makes up a bulk of our platform. Everything else is maintenance and management, but you have sites, you have builds, you have connect, where you can build full middleware APIs that run on edge, and you can connect any data source and chain data sources and create abstractions truly needed for composability. And then you can build your own extensions, things that you will build once, deploy on multiple sites. This will be similar to what you may have heard at Symposium about, Sitecore building a marketplace. Well, where do you put your plugins and your snippets of code that you want to write without putting it in a SaaS or in a base, image container image repository? Then you have to manage and build it. You're extending Sitecore, then you're deploying and having to deal with how those images get updated and upgraded as well. But instead of building it in Sitecore, you build it adjacent to Sitecore in extensions library like Netlify can provide. So in here, for me to get started, it's as simple as creating a new site. So I'm going to create a new site, and here what I'll do is I'll actually import an existing project. I get these 4 options. Now, this is interesting because we actually support Azure DevOps by default out of the box. You don't need an extension like our competition does. So you can basically bring your source code, your repo from any of these providers and connect them. My GitHub is connected, so it'll just authorize and say, yeah, I have a Sitecore Netlify starter kit. That's what I want to use to get started. This is our standard thing we get from Sitecore that's available publicly. You can get one of these instances and deploy it. But I'm going to try to do this. Again, this is not perfect. I'll tell you why in a minute, but I'm going to go through the steps here to say, yeah, there's a little bit more work that probably I should have done, or that the base Git repo needs to have. But I'm just going to say my Sitecore LA SUG demo. Actually, let's make it a little bit better and see if this name exists. I'm just checking if I can deploy the site. Sure, I can deploy it. I'm going to deploy from main because I really haven't done anything. I haven't even updated the default repository that I downloaded. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over a couple of settings here. So my base directory, I'm going to put as Next.js starter because that's what's in the source code. When you go there, you'll see that that's where most of your source code is. I'm just going to put a build command. That's also a pretty default build command. I'm going to give a publish directory. This is just .next. And this is Netlify functions still, because that's the default place where Netlify functions get deployed. And then I can add a bunch of environment variables. I'm going to add a couple of them, but there are multiple ways you can deploy a site. This is still perhaps, a little bit sort of novice way of doing it. More advanced users will do it slightly differently. And more importantly, Netlify does recognize when you have an environment when your source code is, you know, Next.js or whatever, right? However, in this case, that's the part that is less than ideal. That what it's not choosing is a runtime because it is detected the repo as a basic TypeScript repo and not a Next.js repo. So I'm gonna go through this. So these environment variables, I'm basically copying from the environment file. Should be very familiar to you. The most important thing here basically is the edge context ID. And then the last thing I'm going to put in here is a site name. But I'll also kind of show you another way of doing this. It's much easier to just take a complete environment file and just deploy it. But this is all I have to do and hit deploy. Now, if everything was configured right, this should work. But because we haven't picked the runtime and, you know, it didn't detect that it was Next.js because, you know, my repo isn't configured correctly. I can, after it's deployed, I can go in and make sure I pick the runtime that is Next.js and I deploy it and it works. So let's see what's happening behind the scenes, by the way, while this is happening. So while it's deploying, basically it says a site deploy in progress. This will change to the actual URL of the site when it's done. But if I go to my deploys, there's my production and it's building and it's going to tell you really what's happening behind the scenes. So I'll give it a couple of minutes for this to complete. It shouldn't take too long. But while we're doing that, I'll kind of show you some other parts of the application. Actually, Connect, I wanted to kind of actually, I'm not in GTM, so that's why. Extensions. So this is the extension library. So you are free to build and deploy extensions. You can see a lot of our partners and vendors have deployed extensions here. Basically, what an extension is you get to write a snippet of code, but you actually get to package some UI with your code. So you can actually update the Netlify UI to say, yeah, I'm integrating with, I don't know, Sitecore search, right? And I want to provide these variables and these names or for my indexes or any part of the UI that you want to extend in Netlify that makes it easier for you and your teams to work in the future, right? So you don't duplicate code. You don't have to deploy the same, plugin over and over again. You can basically build and deploy and configure it here. And then you also have the option to build private extensions that are just for your team, so you don't share it with the rest of the org. And I want to see if I have access to this. I don't think I have access to Connect. I actually did, but because of the latest deployment, I don't think I have access to it anymore. Yeah, let's see. There we go. Okay, so Connect is available. So Connect is basically, you can think of Connect as data layers. So you create a bunch of data layers. Think of your catalog as a data layer. And what you do with that is basically you can say my catalog is a combination of content that comes from a PIM and an e-commerce and perhaps a little bit of Sitecore. And I want to write now a model that wraps around just the fields I need. Behind that, I'm going to map certain APIs and then sync my data. So Netlify pulls in that data and caches it, and then you get basically a URL endpoint, and you also get a webhook that you can trigger to refresh the data. But you also get this amazing thing, which is a GraphQL sandbox, so you can play with all your data sources as you're going through and validating some of this. I think I'll leave some of this for another time to kind of detail out Connect and extensions, but those I think are a very powerful feature of Netlify that is very different than our competition as well. So let me go back to our demo. Let's see where we are. Okay, there's my new LA SOC demo, but it's giving me a preview because I know this is currently broken because I didn't pick a runtime. So obviously, page not found. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm going to check my environment variables. No, actually, I'm going to go to my build and deploy. And where is my configure here? See this part, configure runtime not set. So at least that gives you a quick example of Angular and whatever else we have in there between Gatsby, Angular, and Next.js runtimes that you can pick from. All right, so that's done. And then all I'm going to do is now hit redeploy. So I'm going to go to build and deploy. And actually, I'm going to go to my deploys, and I'm going to go to deploy my site. So hopefully this works. And if this doesn't work, we'll pause here and we'll come back to it after Rob is done to make sure this actually works. Because demos are demos, right? So hopefully this is not too complicated, and I think this deploy should be a little bit faster than the previous one. So
Question while we're waiting. Any recommendations from your side for the next best extension to build?
So there are two ways I think you can think about extensions. One thing I'm thinking about is what do you build in Sitecore that are these event hooks or pipeline processors that you'll repeat and reuse for a lot of things. Maybe you can use that to build an extension, but I think building something with Content Hub or with Sitecore Search, I think could be a powerful extension. So ability to index content for Sitecore Search. So one of the things I was thinking about was on publish, there's one of the ways to index content is to export into a particular file format and deploy it at the FTP for search to index, Sitecore Search to index. Perhaps that could be an awesome plugin, is have a webhook that builds that file and deploys it to search FTP every time things changes. Things change on the Sitecore side. But yeah, I mean, I think maybe Rob can give some great ideas.
I'll have a think. Yeah.
Yay, and my site works. So that's my demo. The skate park is alive and you can deploy it. So it's as simple as that, right? I went from, what used to take us hours, if not even days, to set up a dev environment to where my dev environment is set up. I can actually start coding and all I have to do is click deploy and my site works. So there's nothing more I need to do in setting up environments. Literally from non-prod to production, it's that simple as that.
Awesome.
All right.
Cool. All right.
Cool. Over to you, Rob, I guess.
Yep. Let's kick it off. So if you guys haven't seen the Rob session at Symposium, so .NET Core is back. It's back.
It is.
I'm excited about this one. Rob
with a vengeance.
Rob's digging in his heels. Here we go.
Can you guys see PowerPoint?
Yes.
Awesome. Let me just move these cameras out of the way. Okay. Yeah, so as Vasiliy said, this is the session that I delivered at Symposium in Nashville. We were just discussing, it actually feels like quite a long time ago. I think it was only about 3 or 4 weeks ago now or something. But yeah, ASP.NET Core is back. And I want to give an introduction to how you can leverage it today with XM Cloud. The one thing I want to kind of hopefully get across with this is it's not actually all that new. So hopefully people will realize that. So for those of you who haven't met before, my name's Rob Earlham. I've been working with Sitecore for 9 years now in a bunch of different roles. Currently, I'm head of developer advocacy. And our team's goal is basically to make every developer working with Sitecore successful. You can see a bunch of social platforms on the screen there. So if you've got any questions after this or just want to reach out and say hello, feel free to give me a shout. Always happy to hear from developers working with Sitecore. So before I dig too much into ASP.NET Core, I'm actually going to start by looking back in time at kind of like the history of building with Sitecore. So if we go right back to the beginning, like Sitecore launched in 2001, launched by a couple of friends over in Denmark. I'm going to skip the first few years and start talking about 2005, though. There's a good reason for that, because that's really when Sitecore started to take off on the global scale. That was when version 5 got released. That was super popular, really impressive version. It's also where my journey first started with Sitecore. I was a junior outside of just finished university, joined a partner in Manchester and got trained on version 5 of Sitecore. And that's where it all began. So if you look back across all of that time, basically .NET has been the primary development language and framework for Sitecore. That's still the case today for XP. You can use JSS, but we still have a large number of customers building with Sitecore MVC. I mentioned JSS. That came along in 2018, and it was a bit of a new direction for Sitecore. This was the first time that you could build headlessly with Sitecore, and it was building with JavaScript frameworks like React, Angular, Vue. Later on, Next.js came as well. But it was the first time you could actually build your front-end website without having to write any .NET code. Moving forward to 2020, this is when we launched the original ASP.NET Core rendering SDK. And this basically allowed you to follow that same headless delivery model, but now building with .NET. So building with ASP.NET Core as it was released back then. If you look at this timeline as a whole, though, really that period from 2018 onwards is a little bit of an outlier. We launched XM Cloud then in 2022. And that was the first product we actually launched where it was primarily JavaScript. And that's what I'm talking about with it being an outlier. You could use the ASP.NET Core SDK. It wasn't that smooth, though. It wasn't kept up to date with the latest XM Cloud releases. It was really only Next.js that had that full XM Cloud support. What I really like about this slide, though, is if you look at it from end to end, it really shows like the rich history that Sitecore has with .NET. We've been a .NET shop for a long time. I always call myself a .NET developer. C#'s my first love. That's why we're re-releasing this SDK. It's a refactor of the original ASP.NET Core rendering SDK we have here, and we're working towards feature parity with XM Cloud. It is also available for XM and XP. I'm not going to be talking about that too much today. I'm just going to focus on the XM Cloud side, but it is available for platform as well. So what's changed? What's stayed the same? Where are we today, and what's coming down the pipe? Well, as I mentioned briefly, this is a refactor of the existing ASP.NET Core rendering SDK. The eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that we've dropped the name rendering from the SDK, and there's a good reason for that. Firstly, it does more than just rendering. As you'll see shortly, there's other functionality baked into the SDK, so it kind of was a little bit of a misnomer originally, kind of leading people a bit into the wrong intentions with using it. It also highlights that in the process of doing this, we're going to be breaking things along the way. So we do have customers who've built along the old SDK. There is a migration path, but there will be some changes you have to make. It's not just a case of changing your references in your C# file, in your project reference. There are going to be some code changes you have to tweak with the middleware to move over as well. The SDK is available today. It's available in pre-release format. It's all open source on GitHub. It's available on NuGet as well for you to reference within your projects. And we also have a starter kit available today. So anyone who's built with Next.js before in XM Cloud, you'll have used the XM Cloud Foundation head repository, which is using Next.js. Angular is going to be getting added to that same repository shortly. What we're doing is we're basically creating a starter kit repository by language. So the Foundation head is going to be renamed to the JavaScript starter kit. It'll have Next.js and Angular. And we've created a .NET starter kit, which today has the ASP.NET Core starter kit in it as well. Again, available on GitHub, open source, and yeah, available to use with XM Cloud today. I've mentioned open source a few times now, and the efforts around the starter kits, around the JSS SDK, around the ASP.NET Core SDK I'm talking about today, it really shows Sitecore's renewed focus on open source. So both the starter kit and the SDK are available on GitHub. The previous versions of the SDK were not open source. But this isn't a case of us just kind of pushing the source code out and kind of forgetting about it. We want community contributions as well. If you notice something wrong with the SDK or the starter kit, please open an issue. If you go and check out the repository, you'll see there's a bunch of open issues there. If you want to contribute back to those repositories, we would love contributions, PRs from the community. It'll look really good on the MVP application, which is very timely around this time of year. We've also enabled discussions functionality on the GitHub repos, which I don't think Sitecore's used that much before. And that allows us to have kind of more long-tailed discussions, as the name suggests, where you can ask questions around like why things are implemented that way, maybe around future direction to the SDK and starter kit, and suggestions for features you'd like to see added. Again, we really just want to get the community involved with this. It helps us kind of stay connected with the community, making sure we're heading in the right direction. Basically, we don't want to just run in one direction with our eyes down. We want to have conversations along the way, making sure we're building what you all want to use. So a good question we get around this is, who would choose to use this SDK instead of the Next.js one, which, as I said, is the primary driving force for XM Cloud today? And there are a few reasons. One of the common ones we hear is that you may be at a partner who has a really strong in-house .NET development team, maybe a customer as well. If you've been on Sitecore for a long time, you may come from that .NET pedigree as well. It means your team are built to build on .NET. They can deliver features really, really quickly. Pivoting over to Next.js is not a trivial factor for that. You either have to retrain your devs over to a new language, a new framework, or you have to bring in new people with that expertise. And some customers and partners don't want to do that. They've invested a lot in these .NET teams. If you're in that scenario, then working with ASP.NET Core could be a good choice for you. The next one is you may be working with a customer who has an existing ASP.NET Core application. It may not have any CMS functionality, and they want to enable their marketers to be able to edit the content that's displayed with it. The ASP.NET Core SDK and XM Cloud is a great example for this. It's a great option because it's all implemented via middleware. So it's super easy to do. You plug the middleware in your program CS or your startup CS, and then you basically just choose the routes that you want to Sitecore enable. So you don't have to have it take over the whole application. You can selectively just sprinkle Sitecore throughout where you want to have it enabled. The next one is probably the most common one we're hearing. You may be a customer who is working in a regulatory restricted environment. So you may have restrictions on the hosting providers you can use. You may have restrictions about like vendors that you can sign up with. So primarily, if you're building with Next.js, you're going to want to deploy to Vasiliy or Netlify, as Varun was just talking about, because you're going to get the most out of the language there. If you're trying to stand up Next.js on Azure or on AWS, it's not simple. Like, a lot of the functionality is actually provided by the hosting provider, not the SDK itself. So you're probably going to be in for a lot more work than you anticipate. And in those scenarios, again, choosing ASP.NET Core to build with could be a better option for yourselves because it's natively supported on Azure, AWS, GCP, all those larger, more not more enterprise, that's probably not, but the more larger cloud providers that you might be restricted in choosing. Okay, so that's kind of covered what it is and why it is. Let's take a look at how it works. So with XM Cloud, you have Experience Edge built in, and this is our globally scaled edge delivery platform. So all your content's there available across the globe at lightning speed. As we've mentioned in a few sessions today, XM Cloud's headless. So with ASP.NET Core, you need to deploy the application in each of the regions you're going to be working in. What happens then is each of those application instances will pull its layout data from Experience Edge and then render out the experiences to the customers who are basically accessing your site. But what I want to do is I want to dig into the interactions between one of those apps and XM Cloud itself. So what happens first of all is you have XM Cloud and all of the applications that are kind of hosted within that. You have sites where you build your different sites if you're a multi-site instance. You have pages where you can compose all the different pages that are in those sites. Then you have components where you can use some pre-built components or compose your own to be posted on those pages. There's a few other apps in there like forms and things as well. And that's basically what you use to build out the different experiences in XM Cloud. For once, I'm really happy that we named things sensibly. They don't have Sitecore names. They do what they say on the tin. So that's good. It's been a nice decision. But you go through and you use all those different apps. And when you're happy, you'll create a page and you'll publish it. And what we do is we take that data, and as I said, we output that to our Experience Edge globally scaled edge delivery platform. So then a user will come along, they'll access your URL, and that'll be a request that goes through to your ASP.NET Core application, which has the SDK integrated into it. So the first thing the SDK is going to do is it's going to make a layout request over to Experience Edge, and it's going to get quite a large JSON document in return. And that JSON document basically defines everything that the SDK needs to render out that experience on the front end. The next thing we do is we take that JSON document and we pass it through a model binding layer. So that basically takes everything from there and passes it into strongly typed C# models. These are what you can use to basically access the data that you're creating in XM Cloud. Finally, those models are passed into the views, and in the views, you can use tag helpers. The tag helpers are used to render the individual pieces of data, which are defined in those models. This, as an overall kind of developer experience, it's really nice, because what you're doing here is you're actually just using straight out of the box ASP.NET Core functionality that's been made Sitecore aware. There's no weird and wonderful Sitecore way of doing things. If you've built an ASP.NET Core app today, this is going to be really, really familiar. So next up, I want to dig a little bit deeper on the model binding and the tag helpers specifically, because that's where you're going to be creating most of your code in the front end. If we take a look at an example, let's say a promotion component, you're going to have things like an image to make it nice and engaging. You'll have some text data explaining your promotion, and then you'll probably have a link. So you want the user to click that, and you'll send them somewhere to complete it. That's what you can see on the screen now for the model show here. What we're basically building is just dumb POCOs. Really, really simple to create. You'll notice each of the fields has an attribute defined on it. And those attributes tell the model binding functionality where in that big wall of JSON to pull out that individual piece of data. So the image for this promo component, that attribute on there will tell it where in the JSON to find the reference for that individual image field. Anyone who's worked with things like Newtonsoft.json, system text JSON, anything like that, again, this is going to be really familiar. So once you've created your model, next up, you're going to go and create your view. Again, we're staying with our promo component here, and you can see the view here for that component. If you look at the top, you can see the models defined there, and we just pass it in as it is. There's no need to wrap it in generics, hiding some kind of obscure functionality in there. It's just a plain old POCO that's passed in, pre-populated by all that model binding functionality. If you look below there, you can see the markup that's rendered, and in there you can see the tag helpers in action. First up, we're using the SC image tag helper to render the image. Then we're using the SC text tag helper to render the text field. And finally, the SC link tag helper to render the link. You might ask why we're using these tag helpers and not just traditional HTML elements. Why don't we just use an anchor tag for the link? Why don't we just use an IMG tag for the image? The reason for that is editor compatibility. So when you use the tag helpers like this, if I go and load this component in Pages, that's what makes it content editable. So the marketers can come along, they can change the image, they can overwrite the text, they can change the link. That's what a CMS is all about. So leveraging these tag helpers is what is going to enable your marketers to be able to be efficient and actually do their content management activities. You can see a full list of the different tag helpers that are supported from XM Cloud on the left. And it's basically all your standard fields that you'll be using in Sitecore. Okay, so I think it's about time we take a look at this in action. So what we're looking at here is the starter kit repository. And this is a template repository in GitHub. So I'm going to create a new repository based on it. And I'm going to store it in my personal GitHub account. And we'll call it ASP.NET Core Symposium 2024. We're going to use that name throughout. We'll keep it public. And then we'll click the Create Repo button. And then that's going to basically create a copy of the repository in my own GitHub account. Once we've done that, we can hop over to the XM Cloud Deploy app. And that will then allow us to leverage this repository to create a brand new project in XM Cloud. So we're going to go into there, and we're going to use the same name throughout, as I said. We're going to use the use your own code flow. But before we get to that, we're going to connect it to my GitHub repository. It's already been connected. We have a connection over there. So I'm going to go, and from the drop-down, I'll select the Rob Earlham one. And then it lets you choose the different repositories that are in my account. Luckily, you can search, because I've been a GitHub user for many years now, and there's quite a few repositories that I've created over the time. So we go in there and we start typing the name, and it pops up. We're going to leave it connected to the main branch, and then we'll go over, and next we're going to create our environment. We'll just call it testing for now. We'll set it to auto deploy as well on push. And what that means is every time we create a change and push it into the repository, it'll automatically create a deployment in XM Cloud. We click deploy and it went and deployed our XM Cloud environment. I would love to say that it's fast in real life. Obviously, I've sped that up for the demo. As you can see from the output there, it took about 6 minutes in total, just over, to go and do that full deployment. It'd be a little less on the subsequent ones because it wouldn't have to do the provisioning step. That only happens the first time you create an environment. So it's usually around 4 minutes after that for a new deployment to happen. Okay, so we've got our environment created. It's tied to a repository in GitHub. Well, there's nothing in there yet. It's all blank. That's what you get when you first start a new XM Cloud environment. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go and create a site. So to do that, I'm going to hop back to the environment I just created using the breadcrumbs above, and you'll see that successful deployment that we just had. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to hop over to the Sites tab, and it'll tell us we don't have any sites created yet. This is an empty instance, as I said. So I'm going to hop and click the Create Site button, and that's going to take us over to the Sites Manager. Now you get two options when you create a site. You can create a blank site, which when you're doing a real implementation is what you would choose because that's an empty slate for you to begin your implementation on. We're going to use the basic site here though, which is what we've called the skate park, because it's a good demo site. You get a couple of pages, there's a couple of controls on there, and that allows you to basically see XM Cloud in action. So we'll choose basic, we'll confirm that, and then we'll enter some details. We use the same name and description as before, and then we set up the site collection. So the site collection allows you to group sites. Maybe you have multiple brands and you want to group the different brand sites together. That's what a site collection is for. After this, we check all our details are correct, and then we click the Create Site button. That's going to go away, and it's going to provision the site for us in XM Cloud. It's going to create a bunch of different content items in there. We'll see those in the content tree later, and we can see our site's been created. Again, I sped that up for the sake of this demo. It takes about 2 minutes in total usually to actually create a site though. So next up, what I want to do though is get my local dev machine working because I want to be a productive developer. I want to make sure that I can connect to XM Cloud, build my components, and start creating these awesome experiences for my customer. So I'm going to hop back to GitHub to do this, and we're going to clone this repository down to my dev machine. To do that, we're going to copy the SSH command, and then I'll pop up my dev terminal, and we're going to run a standard git clone command to pull it down to my solutions folder. Once we've done that, we're going to open my solution in Visual Studio. And what we need to do is connect my local dev machine to that XM Cloud instance, that testing environment that we just set up, because that's how we're going to get our live data. To do that, we need to populate some values in the app settings.json. You could do that directly, but that's not advised. We recommend creating an app settings.development.json, because then it's going to avoid accidentally committing any secrets into your repository. So that's what we're going to do here. If we hop over, these fields should be pretty familiar from Varun's presentation. We need to populate the context ID, the site name, and the JSS editing secret. These are all available in XM Cloud Deploy. If we go back over here to the dev settings, you can see those 3 fields are all available. So I'm going to copy those one by one, hop back over to Visual Studio, and paste each of them into our app settings.development.json. Once I've done that, I'm going to run it locally. I am quickly just going to configure a dev tunnel, and there's a reason for that we'll see in the next section to connect pages. But what that basically means is it creates a URL that allows external machines to be able to access my locally running application instance. After that, I hit F5 to run it as you do any other ASP.NET Core site, and that'll execute the site, pop up a browser, and here we can see we have the skate park site running locally. So that's an ASP.NET Core site running on my dev machine, connecting out to Experience Edge to go and pull in the data from the XM Cloud testing instance that we looked at. The final thing I want to do is to get pages working. Pages, as I mentioned, is how your marketers are going to go and connect to your instance. They're how they're going to create the different experiences, drag components on, do their content editing. What we're going to do here is connect pages to my local development instance. It's probably not the way you do things normally, and I'll talk about that a little bit afterwards, but it allows me to quickly test any local changes and get pages working against a site that's been stood up. If I scroll down first, you can see these 2 panels here. They're actually the promo component I had on my slides before. You can see there's the image there. You can see it's got some text below it as well. The link is an output because it wasn't populated. It has a conditional statement around it. But what we're going to do is we're going to go and connect pages to my local instance so I can show that editing experience for that component. So I'm going to copy the dev tunnel URL that Visual Studio created. We're going to hop back to our deploy app, and then we're going to use the open dashboard instance. If we go over to the tools section here, anyone who's used XM Cloud recently will notice that this has actually been redesigned in the tools section. But we're going to hop over to the content editor here, and we're going to go and set up our rendering item. What this does is it tells pages how to access the instance of the rendering host that it's using to display for its pages instance to allow for an inbuilt WYSIWYG editing interface. We're going to save that, and then we'll hop back to the main instance here. Once we get back to sites, we can then click on the site itself, and it'll render pages connecting down to my local dev instance to pull in its data and show an inbuilt WYSIWYG activity, as I say. Here's the site we just looked at. And I'm going to make it a little bit wider so it's easier to see. If I scroll down, you can see we have those promo components. And you can see when I hover over them, I get these like contextual menus showing that they're content editable. If I click on the image link, for example, it'll show me images out of my media library, so I can change it. I can then go and overtype the text as well. So this is how marketers go and they update the content shown on their different sites. This is, CMS kind of 101 functionality, basically. What this highlights really nicely, though, is how those tag helpers I talked about before enable this. If we just use the IMG tag to render out the image from the model, or anchors to render out the links, these wouldn't be content editable in the same way. Okay, so I want to finish up by talking about some considerations you might want to think about before choosing whether to build the SDK. The main one is I want to reiterate this is a pre-release instance. We're working towards version 1. We're not there yet. If you need every XM Cloud feature today, then this may not be the SDK for you. The demo I showed there, where I went and updated the rendering host to point down to pages, there's a new, more modern way to do that, which JSS enables, called metadata page editing. We are still looking at building that into the SDK, so that's why we have to go through the rendering host option. Also, XM Cloud by default will stand up a version of your application called an editing host. So when you create your environment, it'll deploy an instance of a Next.js app onto our infrastructure to power pages natively. That, again, isn't supported. It's being worked on today. Currently, you'd have to stand up an instance of your app external to XM Cloud. It's not that difficult to do if you're already deploying your app to Azure. It's just deploying another instance of it. It's just something you've got to bear in mind. If you go and check out the SDK and the issues repos, and I'll have links at the end, you can see we have open issues there which show what isn't supported today and shows basically what's being worked on and when things are going to arrive next. The next is one I find quite interesting, and that's the discussion between static site generation and server-side rendering.
Yes.
Again, most of the time you're going to be considering this against Next.js. Next.js natively supports both static site generation and server-side rendering. ASP.NET Core is a server-side rendered language by default. There is no static site generation. Some people see that as a negative. I'm not as convinced. ASP.NET Core has been out for many, many years now. Caching isn't a new thing. It'd be pretty easy to build a caching layer via middleware maybe into your application, or you could stand up something like Cloudflare in front of it to enable front-end HTML and asset caching. Yeah, so it's not a common one. Next one, kind of related to that, is Edge rate limiting. So our experience, Edge does have a rate limit on it. 80 requests a second is the limit. When I gave this session in Symposium, I luckily had Ivan, who's one of the PMs for Edge, in the audience. And he pointed out that it's actually that 80 requests a second doesn't include cache hits, which I didn't realize. So once a page is cached, it doesn't count because there's caching in Edge. Once it's cached in Edge, it doesn't count towards that rate limit, which is nice to know. But still, if you have a site that might be quite peaky in traffic, maybe you're an e-com site and you're dealing with something like Black Friday and the sales there, that could be something you want to consider at that point. Another one which I love is what about Blazor? What about Maui? What about Microsoft's next framework that they're going to build? My favorite answer to this is not yet. myself and Ivan, who I mentioned previously, we're the two main leads working on the SDK and the starter kit. We're making sure we're building this in a way that we could support it in the future. When I showed the 3 layers before in the architecture for the SDK, the GraphQL layer and the model binding layer would most definitely be shared when we implement another rendering engine. We just have to rebuild the tag helper layer and the rendering engine for Blazor or Maui or whatever it is. And it's all open source. So if someone in the community wants to build a Maui rendering engine, that'd be pretty cool. So I have one last slide, which is super important, probably my favorite slide of the session. We want your feedback. If you follow these QR codes, they'll take you to the URL below. That's for the repositories for the starter kit, for the repository for the SDK as well. Kind of as I've mentioned a few times now, they are both open source. If you see an issue with any of them, please raise it. We had a couple of issues raised this week, and we've pushed through fixes really quickly. If you want to contribute back, take a PR, take an issue, have a look at it, see if you could open a PR against it. And as I mentioned, if you have just questions around future direction and what we're thinking, use the discussion functionality there as well. We really just want to hear from everyone. We want to hear from how you're using it. What can we do to make your experience with it better? And that's it. So any questions?
Thank you, Rob. One thing I wanted to point out, because I went through this whole thing after Symposium step by step. And I got to that one step and he's like, what is this URL he's copying and pasting back into the thing? So that in your slide, it wasn't quite clear that you have to create a dev tunnel in Visual Studio, and that's the URL. So yeah, it does talk about that on the thing, on the actual repo. So follow the steps there for whoever's going to go along this. The URL he copied after he launched the site, it's a dev tunnel you have to create. It's like 2 steps in Visual Studio, but just because that was like, what is this? That's not what my URL looks like, and so
that's good feedback. We'll get the README updated to be a bit clearer.
Other than that, it's been great. I just downloaded the latest one, and I hope you like my giant PR that I submitted yesterday with
They all count. That's fantastic.
It was a CSS property. It's MVP season. I got it.
I mean, for other people on the call, like how have you found working with the SDK and stuff?
It's actually been pretty nice. I mean, I just got it. I mean, I got it up and running based on your, the same session that you gave at Symposium. Just off those, I recorded that session on my phone and just followed the steps, which is the same steps here. And I mean, I got it to work pretty flawlessly and quickly. So far it's been great. I mean, obviously I used the starter kit, and the starter kit, has some issues and things like that. One other thing I noticed is, and I was going to ping you about it, was that unless you have the environment set to production, like the images and certain components are like relative images. So like the background image for like the container component is like a relative image, so it doesn't load.
Okay.
So you have to. So I was just playing around. I was trying to figure out why the images aren't loading in certain situations. So it's only certain times. I think it's like the image component itself is fine, but like the container is just calling something to get the media URL, and unless it's in production mode, it doesn't get the full URL. So in the local environments and stuff like that, obviously that doesn't work.
Yeah, nice. Oh, there is something else I can show you that's pretty cool, actually. Just let me quickly bring up Teams. One of the SEs here was testing. Was testing the SDK. Hopefully it won't take too long to load. Where did it go? Let me just pop that over. Can you guys see that? So he deployed it to Azure and got 97 on Lighthouse scores for the skate park site, which for an SSR site is pretty impressive.
I was gonna ask, this was gonna be my question, as in, can you really get perfect Lighthouse scores or core web vitals doing it this way? And that is truly impressive, right?
That's it. And full transparency, the skate park site's very lightweight. There's not that much data in there. So once you add more content, you're going to have to factor that in. But I was surprised that he managed to get it that fast. And he said it took less effort to do that with the ASP.NET Core SDK to get those kind of scores than it did with the Next.js one, which, again, I was very surprised with. So
That
We need
is
someone to
that is
try it
incredible.
in earnest. We're in the middle of well, we're actually just about to start rebuilding the MVP site. So it's currently built against the original. It was originally built against the original SDK. We migrated it over, which was pretty easy to do. But it was an old V9 site, I think we built it on. So it's not, excuse me, it's not SXA or anything. So we're going to rebuild it on SXA with the new SDK from scratch against the new branding and everything.
Is
So I'm
there
hoping.
a post on that, Rob? What the SC did to get the Lighthouse course? It's just very hard to imagine that server-side rendering of ASP.NET is getting you that level of performance. Even if it's a simple page.
Yeah, it was Christian Harm who did that. So what I'll do is I'll message him and see if he wants to write a quick blog post about it.
Yeah, I got a little nostalgic, to be honest, when you showed the POCOs and the annotations. I was like, man, the .NET developer inside me is like, you dude, I can so go back to this right now. And the good old days of actual, Sitecore in its heyday is just all .NET. I had a question around static apps. Is that on the radar? Is that deployable? How does that connect? Are we thinking about it or not at this point for .NET?
I don't think it's high on the list, basically. Okay. I think we're going to get ASP.NET Core out, and we need to work on getting feature parity with Next.js. That's the big thing. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at now. Again, if someone in the community wants to take a look at it, that'd be great, but I don't think it's something we're going to be looking at in the short term.
Cool. I put a link in the URL. Sorry, a link in the chat for you, Rob. I think your earlier question. I just wanted to make sure. I don't know if that was what you were looking
nice.
at. Right, quite a few options in there.
Well, Rob, this is great. I was smiling when Varun got a nostalgic. I think I felt the same thing. It's just I think. We do have a front end ninja with us.
Yeah,
I disagree.
Yeah,
I think this is awesome. This is awesome. I think this is great. Options are great in general. Especially .NET Core being near and dear to a lot of the Sitecore folks. I think this is a big deal. I think the fact that you guys are providing active support, actively developing on it, is going to make it real, right? There's obviously a lot of push for Next.js. There's what is it, like close to half of the internet runs on React. Like the website wise, if we look at it. So there's of course a massive push behind that, but like you were saying, there are also use cases where things like .NET Core is a good fit. So I'm excited. It seems like I don't have to learn Next.js maybe.
Well, that's honestly one of the big things. I just started playing with it right away. As soon as then, I've been pinging Rob and Ivan on the side of like, can we make this happen? Can we make this happen? And once I heard they were actually like making it happen, I was like excited because it's for people like us who've been working with .NET for 20 years, it's just something more natural to make that transition. And I'm sure this was the intended consequence, but I think it's going to help a lot of existing clients also maybe start making that transition easier because to tell them to go rewrite the whole site and learn a new language, by the way, and fire all your .NET people and get that's a big pill for a lot of clients to swallow. So this is it may seem small in your eyes in terms of development, but I think it's going to have huge impact on the overall thing for Sitecore. So I appreciate you guys and all the effort that's going into it.
I couldn't agree more. I think this is so needed in the community, and it's like you guys are holding down the fort, holding down the flag for the whole community that loved the original .NET development, and now, dude, JSS, it works. Right, I got my HTML helpers that I can use with my POCOs. Hell yeah! And then I want to go to town and create my own. Why not? Right? And I'm pleasantly surprised in seeing the progress. that Sitecore has made in this. And I think this kind of goes back to giving options to the customer, right? Sitecore doubling down on being framework agnostic doesn't just mean JavaScript framework agnostic. It means being inclusive with .NET as well and continuing to support that. I think that's just amazing.
That's it. It's kind of been what's the word, like faithful to our roots a bit. That's why I started with that slide to show like we have such a rich history in .NET. It'd be madness to walk away from it completely, in my opinion. Anyway, yeah. I'm probably biased though, as I said. I love C#.
The whole Next.js thing was like the anomaly too, right? It was like
Exactly.
that's it's
But anyways, well, Rob, thank you so much, man. This is great news. We're all excited. This has been recorded. We're gonna share it out. The more people see it, the better. Hopefully, we'll get a movement behind this. Get the contributions going. So please, guys, again, for everyone, continue contributing to the SDK. Let's make it happen, right? Let's make it real. So, all right. Well, thanks, guys. So
All right.
on this note, we'll wrap it up.